I don't think it's a newsworthy kind of a proclamation to start the sermon. We'll say that the history of the Christian church, pretty much since Jesus did his Superman routine and ascended to heaven, ever since then, well, the Christian church got a lot wrong. We've made quite a few mistakes along the way as a movement in history. It doesn't take a lot of imagination to think about colonialism, racism, homophobia, turning the gospel into essentially snake oil. You know, it's a cure-all. If you just believe in Jesus, everything is going to get better. To let alone the actual wars or the actual wars or the small family skirmishes of like Catholic and Protestant. To say nothing of like the social commentary changes that we've tried to force into people, the damage done. A generation ago, what the church was doing to folks getting divorced. All of that, I mean, doesn't take a lot of imagination because it affects many of us here today. A lot of folks at Spirit of Hope come with some level of scar tissue left on us by a church or a pastor or a community. And I'm one. I feel a little off-put in comparing my church trauma, my religious trauma, to like institutional racism, but it is all related. I got sucked up into a church plant during high school, and I've got memories of individuals who just I can't shake. I was part of a culture that worshiped and practiced purity amongst its culture. You really couldn't divert from the culture of the room. And it was all undergirded by a theology, not like one branch or one idea of theology. Like if I ask you what happens at communion, like that's a part of your theology. But like the whole of the theology that undergirded this congregation supported the kind of toxic behavior of not just the culture, but of individuals. And it has left some serious scars and still some open wounds. We're in a time of pledge campaign, asking folks for letting us know what you're going to be giving for the church for the next year. That's the announcement I forgot. If you got your pledge cards, be sure to toss it in the offering plate. And I don't mind talking about money. Like you can ask our treasurer. I can get into the minutia of the dollars and cents of the congregation. But because of my church history taught spiritualizing money, I get the ick really bad. I want to talk about what we're going to do with the money, but I don't want to talk about how, like, you, God, and money. That just makes me feel I don't want to walk down that road. There are songs. One of the first conversations I had with Jerry is like, as long as I'm here, we will not be singing this one song. And Jerry, he's like, yes, the theology is problematic. I'm like, no, Jerry, I just sang it too much back in the 90s. So we'll never sing that song. And while I have all this pain and scar tissue and memories that are just kind of wreck me sometimes, I can't help, I live in a tension because, you know what? There was a lot of good that came out of there. I have friendships that I'm still connected with out of those years. Text threads and whatnot. There were adults when I was at that vulnerable teenage time. I had adults who asked me weekly how I was doing and wanted to hear stories about my life. And it was in that congregation that my call to be a pastor was not only found, but nurtured. All that's to say is, I come with all of that historical church experience and my own personal one. As I bring it into today's passage, the disciples show up to Jesus and they say that there's an exorcist. There's this guy doing these deeds of power, and they tell him to stop because he's not one of us. What have I always taught you guys? Where do you see yourself in the story? Well, I'm not Jesus. I'm rarely ever him. And in this one, I don't necessarily feel like the disciples. I don't know about you, but I have been on the other end of the church's finger, saying you don't belong for one reason or another. I have been that other one, and I reread this passage, putting myself in that position in all the different kinds of contexts, and I keep waiting to hear Jesus say, right, yes, only people who follow me can do these words of power, but that's not how Jesus actually reacts. The disciples, he treats them, first, he tells them, don't do it. Don't stop the person. It's a correction to the disciples. And he doesn't correct them with a sense of overarching pain. He doesn't want to cut them out. He doesn't stomp them out, which is a nice reminder for me. And when I look back at the pain of religious trauma in my life, the church wasn't a mustache-twirling villain trying to crush me. They were a scared population trying to protect who they thought us was. And I think that more often than not is what gets us in trouble as congregations and churches and Christianity as a whole. We're good intentioned, but we're scared to lose what makes us us. Or we have some misconception. In fact, Jesus transforms it. Not only does he offer them a little bit of grace and saying, anybody who's with us, anybody who isn't against us is for us. You can't do anything, no one can do this power without me. And in fact, anybody who offers you a cup of water in my name, they get a reward. It's kind of a reminder that the authority of the gospel, the authority of anyone trying to follow Jesus, isn't their ability to control their theology or give you an airtight doctrine. The authority lies in our compassion, in the mission towards people. The church's authority is not found in a better crafted mission statement. The church's authority is not found in a detailed strategic ministry plan or a louder creed. The church's authority is found in its sincerity to love people, in the depth of our gentleness. And this is helpful because I've had this conversation a bit. I have this conversation even with some of our prospective new members, people who start coming to church, parents of Sunshine Valley kids. It always starts off with something like somebody trying to pull me aside and it's like, hey, I don't really do the God stuff. Which I always find kind of funny because they're like trying to sneak it in, and I'll throw it back because I'm pretty comfortable with that. You know, what you're generally uncomfortable with is what feels like mythology, like the Christian mythology that you got Jesus like I said, Jesus doing a Superman routine, ascending to heaven, the healings, the fact that this is a story about an exorcism. You get uncomfortable with it. But I'll say this about all the folks who seem compelled and brought close here. There's something about beauty and justice and care that doesn't feel like an evolutionary accident. It doesn't feel like human rights is just brain chemistry gone rogue. And I can feel where somebody who is nominally or formerly religious is coming from. I think some of the old frameworks of how we think about God don't really work. I don't know if they ever did, but they certainly don't work now. The God who seems mostly interested in catching someone doing wrong, out. Religion that feels like a cosmic multiple choice test, like a choose your own adventure, but don't choose wrong or you're going to end up in fire. Ugh. The endless tug of war of argument between science and faith. The reduction of spirituality into either blind certainty or just vague self-help. None of that works. It's like we've inherited a house that's a beautiful place, but the roof seems to leak. The wiring's bad. The basement smells like mildew. And we keep trying to decide whether to move out or to start renovating. And yet something in us still believes that there's more to this existence, this world, that there's something behind the thing. That love, wonder, and mercy are not just illusions that we invented to make the chaos of life bearable. That maybe, just maybe, God is still holding place amongst us in the ruins of broken religious systems, institutional frameworks that don't work anymore. And then you actually have to start building in us. I have spent so much time being able to name exactly where my pastor fell short. And I can show you line by line where I think the pastor I grew up under, the pastor who claimed my faith, I can point exactly how he screwed it up. And I can tell you how much I've tried to change and be a different kind of pastor. But what's most valuable is, so what kind of pastor am I going to be? A lot of us have hurt church experiences. How do we provide the good church experience? Where will we start developing the us? It's not the us that's the problem. It's our need to make a them. That's what causes problems. When our worship of conformity outweighs our compassion, we are no longer a church, not the one Jesus intended to build. The rest of the passage, the story starts with Jesus saying, hey, if you're not against us, you're for us. Let the circle be wider, we include, and then in the next breath, Jesus puts up a barrier, one that's so harsh and kind of violent in its imagery. Jesus is expanding the wall, expanding it. Yes, welcome that guy, even if he's not one of us. Bring him in. We're all in us. And then Jesus says, if you cause a child to sin, you might as well get tossed into the ocean. That's a hard stuff. That's a barrier. Jesus takes religious harm incredibly serious. This is good news. Jesus takes the fact that we are following him so serious that that our compassion for little ones, and you are considered a little one. This isn't just about our Sunday school programming. Whenever someone is actively trying to harm you, if our faith, if our institutions are getting in the way, we have to be willing to cut them off. When Jesus talks about a millstone or cutting off hands, he's not literally threatening people with hell. He's exposing how hellish it is when faith wounds the vulnerable. He's naming that what love demands. Not more shame, but a willingness to cut away the parts of our lives and the systems that cause pain. In short, purity is never worth one of your souls. God's Spirit keeps moving even among the rubble of our faith systems. For those of us who said, I just can't do the God stuff, God's already there. And in fact, that kind of ground is where resurrection has been known to happen. God's love keeps surviving our worst attempts to control grace. God's love keeps surviving our worst attempts at control. And this is good news, that even when religion, even when a church forgets what it's for, love doesn't. Maybe that's why no matter how far we run, something still in us hopes that the story isn't over. And that's a little bit of a miracle. After all the walls, doctrines, divisions, 2-hour-long sermons about not holding your high school sweetheart's hand, or the worries of rock music, after all the ways that religion has wounded people in God's name, grace still shows up. Grace is the stranger healing in Jesus' name when the disciples want to stop him. Grace is the survivor of religious trauma who is still holding something sacred within their heart. Grace is what remains, grace is what burns away the fear and leaves behind peace. And maybe that's why the song that we'll sing after this sermon still speaks to us. Even though this is a song that is sung frequently at funerals, so sometimes that's the comparison. Amazing Grace moves us because it isn't a victory song. It's not a victory song for those with spotless faith. Amazing Grace is the survival song of the found. It's the voice of someone who has seen the worst in us and still believes there's a God who won't give up. So when we sing it, we're not pretending that religion never hurt anyone, or that our scars aren't real, or that we don't still carry open wounds. When we sing Amazing Grace, we're testifying that love outlasts even our failures to love. That grace is still amazing. Not because we deserve it, but because it keeps on finding us. Glory, hallelujah, and amen.